Art is too important not to share. Welcome to the Allie and Callie Artcast.
Hi, I'm Allie.
And I'm Callie, and we're with the Coeur d'Alene Arts and Culture Alliance. Hello, everyone.
Hey, everybody. It's another sunny day in paradise.
It is. It's, oh my gosh, there's a lot of construction.
There is a lot of construction.
Let me just say, I could barely get here because they're putting some stuff on Mullen Sewer for like a month. I don't know what's going on, but
I know. It seems like a dumb time to be doing all the construction, but I get that it's
no
like
good
the
time.
only. Yeah, right.
There's, I know, but you got to do it when you got to do it. But
anyway,
how's everything? Now, you just had a visit from your mom.
I did.
A lovely visit.
My mom, who will be 90, she is a lot, and then we babysat the 2-year-old grandson this weekend. So I had a very busy, exhausting weekend.
I get that. Yeah.
But it was fun. It was great to have my mom here.
Yeah.
Yep. And then put her on a plane this morning.
Yep. And we, we're busy getting our house ready to have our in-laws move in with us while we're building them a house. And then our daughter, her house will not be done till the first week in September. And our son
you are going to have a busy
our
household.
house is going to be completely full, so there's no room at the inn. All rooms are occupied. So it's a little busy and crazy. And then, of course, Singing in the Rain.
Right.
Rehearsals are full swing. And then we've got the Arts and Culture Riverstone Concert Series on Thursday night.
That's right. And tonight is Art Walk.
Yes, Crazy Art Walk.
Yep.
So it's a busy, busy summer, but
it is always a busy summer.
Better to be busy than
not,
right?
I don't know if that's true.
I don't know. Right now I'm wiped out. But it's all good.
Yes, it's all good.
So we're excited to have our guest here today.
Yes, Marlo Faulkner.
Yes, hello.
Thank you for being here, Marlo.
Thank you for asking me.
Absolutely. I don't know how long I've known Marlo, but I bet you've known her longer than me.
I've known Marlo for I don't know, maybe 10 years.
Oh.
Or more.
I think the first time I was aware of you, Callie, weren't you in the production of South Pacific?
I wasn't in South Pacific.
No, Stu was.
Stu yes.
was.
Billis. I'm sure you saw Billis. Yeah, and that was a long time ago. Yes.
Wasn't that at Lake City Playhouse?
No, that was Summer Theater.
Summer Theater, yeah. When it was... I don't know.
That was at Schuler.
Yeah, it was at NIC.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what year.
Right.
I don't remember the years, but yep.
We've all been around for a long
Yes, we've all been around a long, long time.
So for those who don't know, Marlo's a writer. Tell us all the things that you were involved in.
Right.
Oh, dear. Now or lifetime?
Well, start kind of at the beginning. You've been in Coeur d'Alene your whole life.
Well,
or at least you started here.
Actually, I was born at Deaconess Hospital in Spokane, and my mother delivered me.
Really?
I was one of those, as many people would agree, bastard children of World War II. And my mother worked for a doctor who delivered a lot of women who were not married and who were pregnant, and the orphanages were full. And at the time in Coeur d'Alene, during the war, there was a huge naval training base north of us called Farragut on Buttonhook Bay. And many of the people who were posted to Farragut, Navy personnel, were permanent, which meant that this was considered a hardship because it was out in the middle of nowhere. So they were able to bring spouses if they had them. So there were all these trailing spouses, and there was nowhere to put them because there wasn't apartments. There was nowhere they could go. So people, the Navy asked people in Sandpoint and Coeur d'Alene and other towns if they would put up these people. And we had, as I remember, at least 5 Navy couples living in our house at all times.
Wow.
And my mother was working 16-hour shifts at the hospital. My father, at the time, ran the only marine mail route in the United States. So he had to go get the mail, sort it, get on the boat and head out, and he covered the entire west side of the lake.
Wow.
Down to Rockford, I believe. And so somebody had to take care of me. That meant all of those, I was reared by all those people.
Wow.
Right.
Plus, there was a Swedish couple, the Eklunds, who lived in this little tiny room, which we would now call a closet. And Grandma Eklund, specifically, her job was to take care of me. And she had one of those World War II hairdos where everything is slicked up to the top of her head with curls. And she would go to the Desert Hotel, which is where we are, wonderful Art Deco hotel. And in the lobby was a beauty shop, and she let me, I could go with her, and the lady in the beauty shop would let me climb up on this ladder she had so I could watch her make the curls. And there was always a perfectly white one right in the middle. It was really special. I was so pleased when Mark and I were married in 1969. She was well into her 90s, and we flew her up to Palo Alto, and she came to the wedding.
Oh,
So it was
nice.
it was really nice.
Oh, cool.
So I grew up. I remember those people taught me to sing, and taught me all kinds of things. I'm sure my mother wouldn't have approved of, but I must have been in my 40s when I was humming around the house one day, Maresy Dotes and Dozy Dotes and Little Lambsy, Little Lambsy Divey. I did not know that meant mares eat oats and does eat oats and little lambs eat ivy. I mean, for 40-some years I'd been going around singing these World War II songs that I learned by rote.
Right.
But they taught me to swim. There used to be all kinds of commercial docks on the city beach because there weren't roads around all the lakes, so there were what they call water taxis. And my mom, who never learned to swim, was the first woman to have a license, license to from the Coast Guard to drive a commercial boat, and she used to drive those water taxis. In fact, I was quite surprised to go into the museum one day, and they had a postcard of my mother piloting one of the water taxis.
Oh,
great.
my goodness.
There was an old picture they found and made it into a postcard. But I grew up in the Fort Grounds, and we were sort of known as the Fort Grounds Gang, because we used to do things on Sunday. For instance, there was two-way traffic on Park Drive. And we used to, Bob Shine-Eye was one of the worst of them. And we would get somebody like Bob Shine-Eye or Bobby Shine-Eye and Butch Dahl or Betty Hamlet, somebody like that. And we'd get kids on both sides of the road, and we'd see a car coming with an out-of-state license plate, and we would pull an imaginary rope. And they would stop, and we'd say, "We wanted to stop you and tell you to be careful because there are animals in the park. We just saw a cougar." I mean, and then we used to sit on the curb and yell, "Hey, buddy, your back wheels are going forward," and they'd stop and get out, and we always thought that was hilarious. And then it used to be that all these corporations would come to the city park on weekends, and they would have company picnics. So we would go over and we'd go up and we'd say, "I'm Bob's kid." There was always a Bob or an Ed or a Mike. And then they'd let us compete in all the games that they had for the kids. And we'd always win because we did it a couple of times a day every weekend. So we always had hot dogs and ice cream cones and God knows what else. I mean, we could do sack races. We could run with raw eggs in a spoon in our mouth. We could do all that. And of course there were trains that went through the park then.
Right.
We used to, everybody went over and put pennies on the track.
On the track, right.
Yeah.
But it was a wonderful way to grow up. I remember when I was about 12, Don Pishner dared me to climb the ladder at the back of the Memorial Field grandstand. and I was rewarded with a cigarette.
I remember Don Pishner.
Because Don Pishner's dad ran the concession there at the corner of the park. And then, of course, there was Playland Pier, and we all knew Earl Summers because we go over it, and he knew all of us, and he'd give us tokens so we could ride anything we wanted anytime we wanted it at the pier. And then the thing that other kids didn't know, underneath the Playland Pier were all these changing rooms so that people who came to the beach could go in these rooms and put on their swimsuits. And in the winter, Earl would take out all the boards for the walkway so nobody could go out there because he didn't want people out in those dressing rooms. But we used to go down, and we knew how to step across those boards. And there was this guy in town, I think I can use his name because I'm sure he's long dead. His name was Chauncey Custer.
I remember Chauncey.
Do you remember Chauncey Custer, a tall, skinny guy? And he used to go down and draw dirty stories on the walls of those rooms. And we thought it was so exciting that we knew how to get out there and we could go read those. Anyway, and we, of course, we all went to Sherman School. And I had a marvelous first grade teacher. Her name was Mary Bain. She was from Chicago. And she taught me to read. Gave me a lifelong love of reading. And I remember when I was on the board of Summer Theater, Mary Lou Reed and somebody else and I went over to renegotiate our contract with Schuler. And I can't remember the president's name at that time. He was sort of a nobody with a white mustache. And we walked into...
That is.
We don't have to name him. He was, he was not a pleasant person. And we walked into his office, and his desk was exactly where Mary Bain's desk had been, in the same angle, in the same place. I said, "Oh, my God, my first grade teacher sat there." He said, "How nice for you."
Pleasant.
Really, Mr. Charm he was. But she had us in the first grade doing all these wonderful things. We put together a store, and people, we had parents come in, to buy things so we could learn to make change and that sort of thing. And when my graduating class from Coeur d'Alene High School, our 50-year reunion, we had a photograph of our first grade class, and there were 24 of us.
Wow.
I mean, we're all still amazingly number around. Donna Runge,
right?
Susan Schreiber, Dick Hawkinson, Julie Blake. It was just really amazing. In fact, my husband and I are driving to California the first week in August, and we're having lunch with Betty Sue Chambers and her husband.
Oh, wow.
So, and we've all sort of stayed together. It's been very interesting, first grade friends.
Yeah, that's really cool. So, Marlo, you've been pretty instrumental in bringing the arts and culture to this community. And I know that you founded the Arts and Culture Alliance with Steve Gibbs.
I did.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the arts in this community and how it's made such a positive impact on the people here?
Well, it all started when my grandmother came to live with us. And she was a charming harridan, and she was the ultimate Irish Catholic grandmother. And when she found out I was in public school at Sherman, that was the end of that. And I was sent to Catholic school at the academy. And my solace was that I got to take piano lessons from Sister Adelbert, who was really a lovely woman. And then I realized that I could not play the piano. I mean, literally, I didn't know this until I was in graduate school. I am literally learning disabled.
Oh.
And one of my disabilities is lack of coordination between my right and left hand.
Oh.
So once I started playing the piano, my grandmother wouldn't let me stop. And my mother was still working. And so my grandmother was in charge. And so my answer was I learned how to lift all the ivory keys off those old pianos that we use for practice. And then I learned that you could shave the wires under the piano so that they were never in tune. And finally, they suggested maybe I not play the piano anymore.
You should stop.
Which was a great relief to me. But it gave me a love of music. And my dad had the boats on the lake, the Siwiwana and the Dancewana, and of course there was always music. I mean, literally, when my dad died, we had stacks of records 3 feet high in the basement. You know, everybody from John Philip Sousa and Benny Goodman I mean, everything you could imagine. And I grew up with all of that. And so when I've just always loved the idea of music, even though I couldn't perform it. Although Gilbert Burns was my director when I started in junior high, because all my friends were in the junior high band. If you got to be in the junior high band, you were in room 7-1, which means you didn't have to take gym, which means you didn't have to wear the gym bloomers and take a shower. So I thought, well, I'm going to be in the band. And so I couldn't play anything, so he made me a snare drum player. So I played the snare drums. And it's interesting, once you get involved in percussion, it's just in your body. It's, you know, and I started following people like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich. And at one point in my life, I worked with Louis Bellson, and it was such a thrill because these were my idols. These were the great drummers. And so I marched with the band, and then I played in the concert orchestra in high school. I played bass fiddle. I have to brag, I was invited to play in the All Northwest Orchestra, and I'm sure it's because they couldn't find enough bass players, but it was really fun to play the bass. So I've just always been involved in music peripherally. And so when my husband Mark and I moved back to Coeur d'Alene from 33 years of being in California and being teachers down there, we wanted to get involved in some things. And the first thing that I got involved in was Coeur d'Alene Summer Theater. I was on the board. And it was a very exciting time because we were looking for an expanded place, and we were hoping to get a new theater built. Ironically, where this building is, and that didn't work. It almost worked. It really almost worked. Jim Elder and Gordon Longwell and I had this plan, and it just fell apart at the last minute. So I was involved there, and one of the things that my husband and I missed when we moved back was opera, because when I married him, I married an opera ticket. I didn't know diddly about opera, but I went every Friday night. And after teaching 5 days that week, as soon as my backside hit the chair, I generally went to sleep. And so we moved our tickets to Saturday, and I really learned to love opera. So we used to listen to the Metropolitan Opera every Saturday morning on KPBX. So one morning I turned it on and there was no Metropolitan Opera, and I thought, what's happened to the opera? And so I called the station. I said, what happened to the Metropolitan Opera this morning? Well, we don't subscribe anymore. And I said, what? I mean, who doesn't subscribe to the Metropolitan Opera? I said, who made that decision? And they said, Vern Wyndham.
Vern.
I said, who's Vern Wyndham? And so I wrote him a letter. Oh, it was awful. I didn't call him names, but I certainly implied that his intelligence was not very high. And they printed it in there because they used to send out a newsletter.
Oh, funny.
And I get a phone call from this woman. She said, I don't know who you are, but I agree with every word you said. Let's do something about it.
Oh.
And it was Ann Monzo, who lived up on Heine Road in the Meadowbrook. And her husband was a singer with the Metropolitan Opera. He was a Russian, his specialty was he was a Russian tenor, and he played what they call comprimario roles in the Metropolitan Opera. Those are roles that have very little to sing, but they have to be on stage. And his brother was head of the music department at Eastern, and they had come out to visit, and they were walking through the resort after lunch, and he saw a picture of a property that was for sale, and he said, I want to buy that, and by golly, that afternoon he did.
Wow.
And they moved from New York to here, and his sister, he was originally from Cedro Woolley.
Cedro Woolley.
Wow.
I was glad to
Washington.
move there just because of the
The
name.
name. And his sister was head of the city choir for the city of Vancouver, Washington. I mean, they were really deep into the music of the state of Washington. And Anne, so we got together with Anne, Mark and I, and Anne, who is always just great energy, said, let's start our own opera. So we did.
Wow.
And we said, how are we going to do that? Well, because we'd been involved with San Francisco Opera, we knew that they had this program called the Marlo, which is named after the first director of the San Francisco Opera. And what it was young artists who are given what is essentially a scholarship to come to San Francisco and study opera. And they would put on operas, and they would travel all over the western states to rural areas. And their mission literally was to bring opera to underserved rural areas. And so you could hire them for $15,000. They would bring 2 pianists, 2 different casts, all the costumes and all the sets.
Wow. What
And
a deal.
What a deal, right.
Yeah.
So we decided we were going to bring San Francisco Marlo program here, but we needed $15,000. So I wrote some articles for the Spokesman and the Coeur d'Alene Press and the Inlander and whatever we could grab. And we had 2 meetings, and one in the afternoon in the basement of the Spokesman Review building on Northwest Boulevard, and one just after dinner. And we made our pitch, what we were going to do, and we raised over $15,000 in one day.
Wow.
That's awesome.
And
Jeez. One day.
in one day. Well, there were people who were hungry for opera, and then there were those the naysayers who said, opera in Coeur d'Alene? I don't think so. And so we did, we brought, the first one was La Boheme, and it was hilarious because they had moved it to San Francisco, the set. It was supposed to be San Francisco in the 1960s. There was a palpable odor of marijuana in Schuler Auditorium. And the girls who were supposed to be from the Cafe MoMA were all in sequined hot pants. I mean, it was really ugly, but they could all sing. And and we worked very closely with all the high schools in the county, and many of those kids came in formal dress. I mean, I saw a guy literally in a top hat, and they, of course, they all died. They all cried when Mimi dies. And so the next year they brought Così fan tutte, and all of the singers in that cast eventually ended up at the Met. It was really quite interesting.
Wow.
And then we were in San Francisco visiting friends, and I pick up the Chronicle, and it says the Marlo program is no more. Well, it turned, because this woman said it was formed to bring opera to underserved rural areers, and those don't exist anymore. Well, that was a crock. Turned out that the director of the opera had spent all the endowment, and they couldn't afford it. So I said to Mark, well, D'Oyly Carte has a Western cast now, and without going into all the details, there is an organization called West Staff, and it is the organization that disperses monies to the 11 Western states for performing arts. And it's a marvelous thing they do, but without going into the detail, I knew that one of the criteria was that if you wanted money from them, you had to have whomever you were going to hire in 3 different states. So I called the people at Whitefish. They were thrilled. And I called the people at the Cutter up in Ione, and they were thrilled. So then I called D'Oyly Carte, Yes, they'd love to come. So we come back to Coeur d'Alene. We come to our board. We by then had a nonprofit board. Guess what? The doily cart is going to come, and they're going to do the Mikado. And these people looked at us and said, "That's not opera."
Oh,
What?
And so there we were with, egg on our face. And Anne said, and we gave her a bad time about this forever, "Well, let's do a one-act Puccini. Anybody can do that." She neglected to tell us that Johnny Skiki, what the opera she was suggesting, was his masterpiece and the most difficult piece of music he ever wrote.
Oh, great.
And it had 13 parts to it. And Bill Rhodes, who I started school with in 7th grade, was home.
he played my Tevye when I was a fiddler.
Yes, had to wear all that ice because he kept getting so hot.
Oh, he was so hot. I loved him.
He had a magnificent voice, and we'd been
did.
friends since 7th grade, so I called Bill and I said, "Hey, you want to sing Johnny Skiki?" He said, "Oh, I'd love to. I've always wanted to sing that." And, of course, Max Mendez was here, and Bert Newman was the Guccio, and Ran Haight painted the backdrop, and we hired... what's his name from Post Falls, the tenor?
Jad?
Jad. We hired Jad because we had heard him do West Side Story the year before.
Yep.
And the Tedmans who live in Hayden had a daughter named Wendy who has sadly passed away. But Wendy was from Fort Worth, and she was a soprano. And she flew in. And, the world came together. And then Judy McGivney, who had more fabric in her basement than anybody in the universe, said, "Well, I have some fabric that looked just great for that bedroom scene." And then the guy who is the builder at NIC said, "Well, I can do the set."
Jack Green?
Who walked out 2 weeks before the curtain.
Oh, no. Jack, shame on you.
Well, I would go farther than that. But. So here we are.
Oh, jeez.
And, this happens. You've been in theater.
I've been
You've
there.
seen these crises. So we all lived through that. And Wendy Tedman, when she arrived, you have to imagine this woman walks on stage for the first rehearsal. She has shoulder-length platinum blonde hair. It's beautiful waves and curls. She is wearing a white mohair sweater with a deep V. She is wearing silver leather pants and matching 4-inch heels. And she's supposed to play a 90-year-old bag. And we're all thinking, oh my God, what do we do now? And Mark is directing, and he doesn't read music. And so when dress rehearsal came and she came on stage, I swear I didn't know who it was. She was so magnificent.
Oh, that's good.
So we took the 13 singers and we did a concert for the second act, and everybody did something they knew how to do. And so the next year, Anne said, "Well, let's do a full opera." So we did Elixir of Love, and we did it as if it were Coeur d'Alene 1904.
Oh, fun.
And Virginia Tinsley Johnson played the madam at the House of Ill Repute that was in Gibbs. And, after Jack Green quit, Mark said, "Who are we going to get to build the sets?" He was just terrified that this thing was going on and we didn't have any set. So he was walking downtown and he ran into a friend, and the friend said, "You look so glum, what's the problem?" And Mark said, "Well, I need somebody who can build a set really fast." And he said, "I know a guy who can build a set, and he has a whole crew here." And it turns out that there's a guy in Hayden Lake who builds sets for a Hollywood theater, Pat Taliaferro. And so Pat came down and talked to Mark, and he said, "Oh, we can do that. You could have lived on that set." It was a real set.
Yeah.
And instead of having all the townspeople running around between acts, David Groth brought in his jugglers.
Oh,
so it was the
I
town
love that.
kids. And, things just... It was just wonderful.
Lined up.
That's cool.
And And I had interviewed a young man who was a protege of Placido Domingo's, who had gone to the University of Idaho. And you mentioned I'm a writer. I was doing a lot of freelance, and I was writing a lot of stuff for the Idaho Alumni magazine. So I called Michael and did his name was Michael Somese, and I did a phone interview to do the article. And I told Anne about him, and this is a true story. Anne had such a perfect ear that when she would audition singers from all over the country, which she did because we brought in people from everywhere, the only thing she asked them to do was to sing A flat.
Oh, boy.
And if they could do A flat, just like that, she knew they could sing. I mean,
Kelly, can you do it? I have to think about it. I have to find middle C. And I don't know if that's it. See, I'd have to find my keyboard.
But she believed if you were an opera singer, you knew where A flat was, and by God, you could do it right now. And if you couldn't, tough.
I'd be out.
Wow.
So
I'm back in the day, maybe, but not anymore.
So she called Michael and she said, "Sing A flat," and he did, and she hired him for our
awesome.
Nemorino, who is the hero of the deal. And so when I interviewed him, I said, "So Michael, how did you get to the University of Idaho?" And he said, "Well, I wasn't doing very well in school, and I had a wonderful English teacher, and she encouraged me. She said that I could grow at Idaho." And I said, "Who's your English teacher?" It turned out to be my best friend from graduates. When I was an undergraduate, her name was Toni Toonen, and she was still teaching in San Jose, and I called her and I told her what he was doing, and she flew up. And when he came off the stage at the dress rehearsal, she was there to tell him congratulations.
Oh, that's so sweet.
It was really
awesome.
fun.
That
it was
just gave
fun.
me chills.
And it sort of grew from there. You know, we did funny things happen. Todd Robinson, who had been in the COSI, he had been in the COSI group from San Francisco. Wonderful baritone. He played our Figaro, and we had a young woman who was a singer from Portland, who Anne's husband's sister had been her voice teacher. She came, and Todd Robinson was about 6'4".
Yeah, he's super
and
tall.
this young woman was about 5'2", and was still nursing her baby, who was about 6 months old at the time. And Mark, my husband, had designed a circular set, much like the one Baz Luhrmann used for Bohème when they did it in Australia. So the circle was broken into 4, so instead of a curtain between acts, they would just rotate this thing. So there's a scene at the end of Figaro where Susanna, who was our young soprano, is really angry at Figaro, who she's supposed to marry, and he's been messing around. And he comes out, and she's just furious. And I don't know if you've ever dealt with fight scenes, but they're very highly choreographed. And Todd came in about 2 seconds too fast, and she came with an uppercut and dropped him to his knees, and he was out cold.
Oh my God.
And this was in performance.
Oh, boy.
Wow.
I mean, all kinds, things like that happen. So other people, we retired, and other people came in, and it's now Inland Northwest Opera. It's a major regional opera. We just had the 20th opera cruise Sunday night. It was
Elixir
2 boats
of Love,
together.
right?
And
Oh, yeah, and I heard it was sold
Elixir
out.
of Love.
Yeah, no, it
wasn't
was Elixir of Love. It was wonderful. The entire cast had sung at the Metropolitan Opera, except for Mike Bullard, who has been in every performance they have ever done.
Yeah.
And he played a walk-on role, but he was the purser on this supposed ship, and he was really funny, and he did a wonderful job.
Wow.
That's awesome.
Cool.
So it was a beginning and an end that was very nice.
That's great.
Hey y'all, it's Jason from Tubbs Coffee Roasters. We are North Idaho's specialty coffee roaster. We are homegrown and we are local. We love coffee and we love our community, especially Allie and Callie and ArtCast. We have a retail space in our roastery in Hayden, and we can also be found on the shelves at Super One and Yolks. And if you like to buy coffee online, we do offer subscriptions. You can find us at tubscoffeeroasters.com. Support arts and culture and your local roaster. That's all.
So since you've been around for so long and seen so many changes, what do you think about the changes that we've had in this community?
I think they're horrible. I grew up in a town where nobody, frankly, gave a rat's rump if you were a Democrat or a Republican. It was a community. Mm-hmm. People functioned as a community. And now we have a lot of people who have moved here who have a particular point of view about religion. The ones I've met tend to be white supremacists. They believe that this country was founded by white Christian males, which is not true. They certainly were Caucasian, but they were not all Christians. In fact, there were several atheists and a lot of other varieties. Mm-hmm. You know, there's always been a white supremacist underbelly in the West. Mm-hmm. Going back to the early settlers who called themselves Christians and then set out to slaughter all the indigenous people because they wanted their land. So there's always been that sense. But these people, I mean, I have a new neighbor who told me she moved here and she came from a very nice town that I've been in California. And I said, "Why did you leave? That's a lovely town." And she said, "The brown people were moving in."
Oh, jeez.
Oh, boy.
And those people are all over here. And they claim to be Christian. They're not behaving like Christians.
Right.
It's not a community. It's the antithesis of community when you have one group who says they're right, they have the only answer, and if you don't believe them, they're going to do something bad to you.
Right.
And that's who these people are. Mm-hmm. And that's what I don't like.
Yeah. Agreed. All right.
So, Marlo, what's next for you?
Well, after the opera, I got involved with the symphony. I was executive director for a while. Mm-hmm. And I've always been writing. I teach at the Santa Barbara Writers Conference. And my life has really been checkered. You know, I've been on hydroplane crews during the hydroplane races and just gave my jacket with my crew stuff on it to the museum.
Oh, nice.
And then at one point, I taught at NIC, and it was very difficult living in Coeur d'Alene in the 60s and being 23 and unmarried. And I dropped into actually Virginia Tinsley, Ginny Johnson was with me, who dropped into the athletic round table one night for a drink after we went to the movie at the Wilma. And you know, we had a drink and then went home. And by the time I got home, my mother knew where we sat, who I talked to, what I ordered, when we left. And I thought, okay, that's it. And I had heard from two women I had met when I was in graduate school at Southern Illinois University. And they had moved to Fort Lauderdale and said, "You want to share an apartment?" Yes. So I put my car that my father paid for in the garage. He paid for it three different times that I owned it. And I flew to Fort Lauderdale and had a fascinating life in Fort Lauderdale. I had never been east of Glacier Park, for God's sake. So I lived in Fort Lauderdale, and at one point, I grew up here, and my parents owned Eddyville, so I grew up in a restaurant and on the boats.
Your parents owned Eddyville?
Yeah.
Oh my God, I remember Eddyville.
Do you know why it's called Eddyville? Because the state of Idaho requires that to have a liquor license, you have a municipality. And there were three partners, and one of them was Earl Eddy, who was a used car salesman from Spokane. And he said, "If I'm going to have to stay over here for the summer, you're going to name it after me." So Eddyville is actually a municipality.
Oh, wow.
So anyway, I was managing this restaurant, and it was 1968, and Martin Luther King had been assassinated, and this was right after Bobby Kennedy. And I was managing the restaurant one day at lunch, and one of our regular guys who I knew, and I knew his wife and family, was sitting at the bar, and he was with this guy who was a real lout, you know, the kind who drink bull shots for lunch. And this guy looked at me and he said, "What's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this?" And I thought, yuck. And I said, "Actually, I wish I were back in the classroom. I'm actually an English teacher." And my friend Dave said, "Well, where do you want to teach?" And I said, "I'd like to teach in the San Francisco area." And he said, "Well, I'm going to California tomorrow." And I could see the Jodes crossing at Barstow. And I said, "You know, Dave, I think I'd like to fly." And he said, "Oh, I have a plane." And I could see Wrong Way, Oregon, somewhere over Kansas. And I said, "You know, Dave, I think I'll just take a jet." And he said, "I have a jet." And so I said, "Hold that." I said, "What kind of a jet?" And he said, "A Learjet." And I said, "Hold that thought." So I went to the office and called my roommate, who was the executive secretary to Learjet, South Florida. And I said, "Does so-and-so have a flight plan for tomorrow?" And she said, "Yeah. He's going into Van Nuys. He leaves here at 7:30. So I went back. I said, "I'll go."
Wow.
So I had been at a party the night before, and this woman said she wanted to buy my car. So I called her and I said, "If you bring the money, the cash right now, I'll leave the key under the mat. You can have the car. But I have to go pay bills," because I didn't have enough money to pay my Florida Power and Light and my Jordan Marsh and all that. To make a long story short, the first funny coincidence was that the co-pilot had been Yvonne Dodge's co-pilot, who was here during the hydroplane races when I was working as a bodyguard for her daughter.
Oh, wow.
So he came out and said, "Marlo, is that you?" So I got to sit in the co-pilot seat. Did you know that Learjet windshields are optically ground, so there's no distortion? It was really fun. So anyway, we get there, and I have just enough money left to stay overnight in a hotel, take a cab to the airport, and fly up to stay with my grandmother in Los Altos, south of San Francisco. So they take me into this hotel where some of them are staying, and I said to the guy, I said, "I have $56 in cash, and I still have to buy a plane ticket." And that's when you could get a plane ticket from LA to San Francisco for $26.
Wow.
You know, on the yellow plane with a smile. But I still have to get to the airport, and I have to pay for a hotel room. And he said, "I have a room over the kitchen for $17. It's a single. Take it." So I thank everybody for the plane ride and et cetera, et cetera. I mean, they were playing gin for $100 a point. I was using matchsticks. It was time for me to leave. So I thanked them all. I went up to my room, took a shower, went to bed, repacked. I was ready to go in the morning. The phone rings, and it's Jack, one of the guys, and he said, "There's someone here who wants to talk to you." And I thought, oh, geez. So I get on the phone, and the next voice I hear is Ed McMahon. And he said, "Are you really an English teacher?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And to make that story really short, his secretary had the flu, and did I want her job? And so I said, "How much are you paying?" He said, $75 a day plus expenses, and you get your own driver. So I worked on the Tonight Show for 2 weeks.
Wow.
And was his assistant, and got to do a lot of interesting things that are make up all kinds of other stories. And,
we need a two-parter.
Yeah, we do.
But my favorite memory is, you know, I grew up in a bar, and I know how to handle myself. And so nobody ever came close to me. Nobody ever put me in an awkward situation. They all knew I worked for Ed McMahon, and that was it. So I'm walking down the hall, and I feel this hand on my left shoulder. And I'm ready to come back with my elbow.
Right.
And I turn around, and it's Jimmy Stewart.
Oh, my God.
And I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Stewart, what can I do for you?" And he said, "Are you really an English teacher?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I am." And he said, "Well, I write poetry." And he's, you know, he is not a bad poet. He has published books. And I said, "Yes, sir, I know you're a poet." And he said, "Well, I wrote this last night, but I'm afraid to read it on the air. I'm afraid Johnny will laugh." He said, "Would you read it for me?" So I burst into tears reading it. It was a paean to his dog who had died the day before, golden retriever. And I said, "Mr. Stewart, this is a lovely piece of writing. You should read it." So he goes on the show. He reads it. Johnny cries. Doc cries. Ed cries. And if you go on YouTube under Jimmy Stewart and Johnny Carson, you can watch it.
Oh, wow.
You can watch him read it.
That's
Okay.
great.
So I flew from there to Northern California, And this is another funny coincidence. I wanted to get a job teaching. So I go to the San Mateo Union High School District. And the woman who was supposed to interview me was sick that day, so her assistant interviewed me. Her name was June McBreen. And she looked at the thing and she said, Finney, University of Idaho, are you from Coeur d'Alene? And I said, yes, I am. And she said, are you related to John Finney? And I said, he's my father. She said, he was my date for the Worley Junior Prom in 1932. That's a true story. And while I was sitting there, somebody came in with a requisition for a teacher at Burlingame High School who had an English and history major, and that would be me. So I went for the interview. They hired me, and my boss, this is not the end of that story, but it's close. My boss invited me to his house for dinner. Ostensibly, a bunch of us were going to go to the school play. And on the way there, this guy, a gorgeous man in a white XKE convertible, pulled up behind me in my gorgeous 63 Bug and started going, Well, I didn't know where I was going. I'd never been to their house before. They had one of those, 8-digit addresses. Mm-hmm. So I'm putting around, and this guy keeps going, and finally, I did something I've never done before and never done since. I pulled over so he could pass me, and as he went by, I rolled down my window and and he zoomed off, and I finally found their house, and I pulled in, and there was that car.
Oh, boy.
And I put my head on the wheel, and I said, oh, now what? So I pulled up next to the Jag, and before I could turn off the ignition, this man opened the door and said, I believe we've already met. And we were engaged 5 weeks later, and we've been married 54 years.
Oh, my God. I love that story.
So, in the meantime, I started writing. I'd been writing all my life, odds and ends of things, and I went to see, I can't believe I can't remember, Mel Gibson and Danny Glover
in Lethal Weapon.
Lethal Weapon. Went to see it and came out, and I said, I don't know why I did this. I turned to Mark and I said, I could have written that. And I saw an ad at College of San Mateo. They were doing a screenwriting class, so I took it. In the meantime, I had a newspaper column, and we had been, my family and I, up to Jack London State Park for a picnic. And I was standing there, and there was this absolutely gorgeous ranger standing there, with the hat and the badge and the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And I had my press card with me, so I walked up, introduced myself, and said that I said, this looks interesting. I could do a column about this. And he said, well, you have to do the column about Charmian London, and who I'd never heard of. Mm-hmm. I mean, I taught Jack London, Call of the Wild and the whole thing, but I'd never heard of her. So he said, follow me. So he took me around behind some trees and pushed a stone in the foundation, and a secret door opened, and he took me up to her private apartment that she had built this after he died as a memorial to him. Mm-hmm. And I was so taken by what he showed me about her. I just fell in love with her instantly, and did 2 columns about her, especially about her clothes. And oddly enough, I got a phone call from a woman who told me that her mother, when she was a little girl, had been her dressmaker, and all of her clothes that she wore to school were leftover fabrics from Charmian's closet. So I wrote a screenplay, and my instructor said, you should write this as a novel first and then sell it as a novel. Mm-hmm. So that was in 1992. It is now, 30 years later, and it's now a novel. I have a big-time agent, and it's out for submission.
Oh, Yay! That's so cool. And what's it called?
Wait.
It's called The Other Mrs. London. It's about a 29-year-old woman in San Francisco in 1900, that would be Charmian, who meets this young writer fresh from the Klondike and ready for fame. And there's instant chemistry and lust. And he breaks the date to marry somebody else.
Oh.
And she decides she's going to be in his life no matter the consequences.
Ooh.
Wow.
That sounds great.
How do you get a hold of that book?
Well, first, some wonderful publisher has to decide to buy it. Has to get through the edit.
Gotcha.
It's been edited, but the process is that publishers have purchasing editors. They have to decide to buy it. And sometimes it just gets to the point where you say, forget this, I'm going to do it myself.
Right.
But so it's out for submission. It just went out for submission. And I have another book called Fish Belly White, which is about the white supremacist movement in North Idaho. And it's been edited. And my life is like this. This woman I chose because she is really tough, and she specializes in mysteries. And I sent my query in my first 2 chapters to see if she would do it. And she said, I'm going to do this. She said, I grew up in Wallace.
There you go.
Wow.
Little small world.
Wow.
It is a small
It is a small
It's all
world.
connected somehow.
Yep.
It's crazy.
Well, Marlo, everything I read about you always ends with, she's a force to be reckoned with. And
Yes.
I totally get it.
You have great stories. And
We're going to have a part 2 with you, because
Yes.
there's more that we need to know.
Yes, I absolutely
Yeah,
think
for
so.
sure. Yeah.
This is just the beginning with Marlo.
Just the beginning.
I was a roadie for Jimmy Rogers.
What?
See, save it.
Save it,
I was
yeah.
in the riot, right? And it wasn't a riot. It was a bunch of us with beer in our hands having a good time.
See, these are stories we need to talk about.
Well, thanks for being here,
Yes.
Marlo.
Thank you for
We'll
inviting
schedule
me.
we'll
My
schedule
husband's
part 2.
so tired of hearing these stories. It's a real pleasure to have somebody respond.
Oh,
Yay.
well, we love hearing it. So
We do.
thank you so much
Thanks
for being
here. I'm Allie.
And I'm Callie. And whatever you do today, make sure it's creative.
The Allie and Callie Artcast is a program of the Coeur d'Alene Arts and Culture Alliance and is sponsored by NIA, North Idaho Alliance, a woman-based leadership organization designed to inspire, uplift, and impact your community and lives. And Tubbs Coffee Roasters, globally sourced, locally roasted coffee.